They have a big sticky foot like a limpet, and they move around on the rocks and they eat seaweeds.
Dad, turn around. There's a giant lobster right behind you. Directly behind you, there's a huge lobster.
I've got him.
And you're filming and a giant lobster appears. Wow, look at that.
So look at that, we were busy filming the abalone, and then the lobster said, "Me too, take my picture as well." And then he came up right under my feet. Look at that, that's amazing.
What a huge lobster.
It's very unusual to be able to pick up a rock lobster in the intertidal like this.
Especially one so big, I mean, that's
and
a
it's
monster.
quite a decent size guy. This is pretty much the legal size, I would say. But of course I don't have a license and I'm not going to take it, I'm going to let it go. Look at that. The beautiful animal. So these are two examples that we're looking at here of animals which have been very heavily exploited. So actually very similar in that respect. So rock lobsters also were extremely common in the early days of the Cape. And in fact, there's an amusing little report that I read about the people in the waterfront prison, the prisoners in the waterfront prison, rioted about the food that they were getting. And the basis of the riot is that they didn't want to get served lobster more than 3 times a week. And even when I first started working here, one of my colleagues used to feed their dog with rock lobster because they could just go to the seashore and it was free and you just collected it. But now the resource has been reduced to a small fraction of what it originally was. There's now only about 5% of the original number of lobsters left in the sea.
Sure.
And although there is a smallish industry, although it's actually closing down in some of the smaller coastal towns, they're definitely still exploited and largely exported. So both these lobsters and the abalone have the wrong characteristics. And the wrong characteristics are that you're worth a lot of money and you're easy to catch.
And I guess that you take a long time to grow up, to develop.
And they also, they both also grow relatively slowly. So both lobsters and abalone, when you get a really big individual, it's several decades old.
I guess that's how they swim.
Yeah. And perhaps the first thing I ought to explain here is the difference between lobsters and rock lobsters. So this thing is the Cape rock lobster, and the animals that you see in the northern hemisphere are true lobsters. True lobsters have enormous claws, so if you see film or photographs of people in the northern hemisphere eating lobster, then they have these nutcracker things and they use them to crack the claws. Rock lobsters don't have claws and live in the southern hemisphere. So in the fisheries in Australia and in South Africa are based on rock lobsters. They don't have claws. So the northern hemisphere guys crack shells with their claws, but the southern hemisphere guys, they don't have claws, but they do have very large molar teeth here. And they place the prey item between the teeth and they crack it. And there's quite an interesting bit of biology here, because depending on the rock lobster size, then it can open its mouth a certain amount and it can fit a certain size shell in there. So there's a very tight relationship between the size of the lobster and the size of the mussel that it can eat.
Sure.
So in fact, in some places, the lobsters are starving, but there's millions of mussels. The mussels are just too big to fit between to fit in their mouths. So it's a very close relationship between how big a mussel he can eat and how big he is himself. It's got a meaty tail here, that's the main part that one eats, and that tail is used for swimming backwards. So the lobster will flap its tail and can swim in an escape reaction very rapidly backwards. But
otherwise they're just living under the rocks, right?
Mostly they live in a hole in the rocks, and then they move forward and they use their walking legs to move forward. So there's two alternative modes of transportation. You can either walk forward with your legs, or then there's the alarm reaction, which is to flap the tail
swim away
and swim away quickly backwards.
So what's preying on them?
So things like octopus and seals and most especially people that eat them.
And otters?
So large, yes, otters like them as well, and large fish can take small ones as well. But they were fairly happy, I think, in the sea around here until people came around. And there used to be a massive population, and you used to be able to look into the little crevices and caves around the peninsula here, and you just see a sea of little tentacles looking, of little antennae looking out at you. There's also a considerable problem with poaching because, again, these animals have kind of the wrong characteristics to survive. They're slow growing, they're valuable, and they live in shallow water where they're fairly easy to capture. Rock lobsters, like all crustaceans, have to molt once a year, or when they're smaller, more frequently than that. Then they actually molt this hard outer coating, and then they go and hide away somewhere and blow themselves up, and then the new exoskeleton that was underneath the old one hardens, and then they come out again in a shiny new suit, but the next size up. It's like buying your kids new school clothes every year.
We covered that in our beach combing where we found a few lobster shells.
Yes.
They weren't actually dead lobsters.
No, that's absolutely right. So you see a lot of lobster shells washed up on the beach, but that doesn't mean that the owner has died. It just means that he's moved up into the next size of clothing. And then lobsters reproduce by laying eggs which are carried by the female. So the female carries the eggs on these appendages on her abdomen, and when she's carrying those, she's termed in berry, and you're not allowed to take animals that are in berry because they're going to produce the next generation. So you'll often see a female with bunches of eggs hanging from each of these pleopods on the abdomen here. But there's an interesting thing living on the underneath of it here. Look, Matt, you see this? You see these things?
Yeah.
It's some sort of, look at them on the legs here.
So Charles looked up these strange things after our outing, and they belong to a tiny phylum of colonial animals called campozoans, or goblet worms. Charles had never seen them before, and they're not included in any of our regional guidebooks. Also, we couldn't find any reference to them living on lobsters, so it's unclear whether they harm the lobster or just attach to them. It looks like another research project is needed here, and it shows us once again that there's always something new and bizarre to find when we explore the shore.